Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lansing Update. I'm your host, Ciaramitaro, and once again I'm here with State Representative Brad Jacobsen. Thanks for being here.
Very happy to be here.
Well, once again we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's start with some of the proposed House bills to change speed limits here in Michigan. Let's just go over some of the stuff that is looking to be changed.
Sure. I've been working for about probably close to 3 years now, trying to make some changes to the speed laws in Michigan. Primarily where we got started on it was on gravel road speed limits. Back probably about 8 or 10 years ago now, the state, under the advisement of the state police, Governor Granholm, they took away the power of local government to regulate speed limits on gravel roads. Prior to that, local municipalities, Orion Township, Oxford Township, could take and, after some discussion and study, could reduce speed limits from the 55 miles an hour, which is the general speed law. If you're on a road that's not posted, there's no other signage, there's nothing, it's 55 miles an hour. But the local municipalities, townships in particular, could change it from 55 to 25. But we had very little, virtually no control to do anything in between. So as such, you had sections of road, there was some, I was involved when I was on the township board with a change in the speed limit on part of Baldwin Road, where it's gravel in north part of Oxford Township, north of Oakwood Road. We had a school bus stop there. We had parents come in concerned because people were going what they considered way too fast on Baldwin, which is, it's a wide section, fairly straight, pretty decent section of gravel road. And we reduced the speed limit to 25 miles an hour because there was a bus stop there. In hindsight, 25 really didn't make sense. If we would have had the wherewithal and the ability, maybe 40 or 45 would have made sense there because the road's straight, it's good shape and such. And that's part of the reason they took that ability away, because there were too many overly restrictive, slow speed zones. And very honestly, there were very little enforcement on that. So the state police took the position that the speed is unrealistic, nobody's enforcing it, we should get rid of that. Governor Granholm agreed, and lo and behold, all those speed limits went away. And virtually all the gravel roads in Oakland County and around the state became 55 miles an hour basically overnight. Now there were still some provisions depending on how many access points, how many driveways, curb cuts, where there might be traffic coming in and off of the road. If there were so many homes per mile, it would slow down to a certain speed. If there were more homes per mile, it would slow down a little more. But in most of North Oakland County here, most of our gravel roads went to 55 miles an hour.
Wow.
And when I was a county commissioner, and then at the state, it's probably one of the major complaints we get on a regular basis. So many other people are driving too fast down my road. What can we do about it? Held a number of hearings. The state police was not really willing to budge very much, and I've been working with them, and we have one of the bills of the 5-bill package that we're working on would allow the local municipality to slow the roads to 45 miles an hour. Not as slow as many residents would like. It was the best I was able to negotiate, and we'll see if we can still get it passed yet. But that's where we were at. Representative Weber out of the Rochester area, he introduced one to allow local communities to have much more control over the speed limits on gravel roads. I don't think that's going to go anywhere because the state police will fight that one tooth and nail. So that's how I sort of got involved in the concerns about the speed limits. And in talking to the state police about the changes I wanted to make, they said, well, there's some other things that we've been working on over the years, different representatives have put forward, and we think some of them are good ideas, and would you be willing to work with us on those? So that turned into a 5-bill package. One of the bills has to do with speed limits and changes in school zones. If you think about it, when you drive by a school, there may be a flashing light that says school speed limit 25 miles an hour when flashing. You go to another spot, there might just be a sign that flashes. There might be another spot where there's no flashing lights whatsoever, and just a little sign that says reduce speed zone from 832 until 847.
Yep.
A variety of things like that. This bill on school area zones would put in more specifics about what kind of signage has to be there, whether if it's flashing, how big it has to be. If it flashes, how often, how bright it can be. Depending on the width of the road and the current speed of the road, how much you can reduce it down. If you have a 55 mile an hour road, you currently cannot, although some people have put signs up that say you can't, would slow it down to 25. By law right now, you cannot go from 55 to 25 in a school zone. That's not permitted, although there's signs out there that say that.
Oh, wow.
And having to do with the speed zones during certain time frames, our bill would require that it would go in even increments, ending in a 5 or a 0, and I believe it's in half-hour increments. There was complaints that we've received in the office, and the state police have also, about some speed traps in various areas, what drivers think are speed traps in certain communities based on goofy time frames, if you would. And I'm sure this school based it on what time buses come and go, but as a driver going back and forth, particularly if you don't drive that same route at relatively the same time every day, you wouldn't know that at 8:47 you were supposed to be going 35.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Signage can definitely be a little tricky with things like that. Is that how you guys mostly go about figuring out whether to increase or decrease speed limits? Is it based off complaints? Is it based off statistics of how fast people are going in those areas? Because one of the other things I know you guys are looking to change is perhaps in some highways making it 80 miles per hour. So is that based off statistics?
Sure. One of the bills, not the 80 mile an hour bill, but one of the other ones in the package, has to do with what's referred to as the 85th percentile. And that's part of a scientific study that you would use to set speed limits. Very often, like the example I used with the school bus stop on Baldwin Road, very often speed limits in the past have been set by emotion rather than scientific evidence. So 85th percentile data, which is the state police have been using some now, this strengthens their ability to use this. And what they'll do is they'll do a speed study on a section of road and figure out how fast drivers are driving on that road, how fast 85% of the drivers are driving. And what data is showing is that people will drive as safe as they feel for the conditions, which makes a lot of sense. If it's snowy, if it's icy, you're going to slow down. If it's raining, you're going to slow down. If it's dry and there's sunny and there's nobody else around, you're going to drive faster. So the 85th percentile looks at a section of road at different times of the day, different weather conditions, etc., and they do a study on it saying, what do 85% of the drivers usually drive? That's the speed they feel safe driving. That's probably right about where the speed limit should be set. And so if we've got, they did a study on old 127 on the north side of Lansing, when you go from Lansing to DeWitt. It's a lot, the section road is some parts of it are similar to M24 here through our area. When it was in Lansing, it was 25 miles an hour. Then when it got further out, it went to right directly to 55, I think, when it got to the north edge of the Lansing city limits. Well, when they did the speed study all the way from Lansing to DeWitt, they found that, okay, right in Lansing area, people were driving about 35. Because the road in that area, it's actually in that particular area, parts of it are one way, 4 lanes wide, and then it gradually narrows down. They were finding people were driving 35 miles an hour. When it got out to the center area, where it was now 55, people were actually driving about 45 miles an hour out there. There's, I'm very familiar with this particular area. There's a couple of schools nearby. There's a school crosswalk over the road. There's a number of fast food places. There's a couple of coffee shops. There's a mobile home manufactured housing park there. In through that area, people were driving 45 where it said 55. And then once they got further out, where it was 55, they were going 60 to 65. So they did the scientific study on it. Mm-hmm. They looked at the traffic patterns. They looked at accident data, looked at the volumes of traffic. They increased the speed limit in parts of Lansing. They reduced speed limits slightly in the middle, and they increased, I think, to 60 miles an hour further out. Maybe they left it at 55, I don't recall for sure. But when they did this, and then they followed up and tracked it for a couple years, there were less accidents, there were less speeding tickets, traffic moved better, people got from A to B better, and it was a success. I use myself very often as an example on M24 when I'm coming home from Lansing in the evening. I will go into Lapeer and come south on M24. It's 55 miles an hour. And when you get to the point where from Pratt Road to Dryden Road in the area known as Metamora, there's gas stations, there's a grocery, there's a fast food in there, a couple of shopping centers, some restaurants, a manufactured home facility there. I slow down to about 40 to 45 miles an hour in there. There's congestion, there's a lot of cross traffic, and as soon as I get further south of the McDonald's area, just south of Dryden Road, speed back up. The speed limit's 55 there. If they did a speed study, I'm sure they would find that most people, like I do, slow down in that one section. Mm-hmm. So that's the 85th percentile data, and we're going to try to allow them to use that more to recalculate speeds across the state.
Very interesting. I agree. I would think it would be more based off people's how comfortable they are driving in the area they are versus maybe rebelling against the speed limit, unless you're a teenager, perhaps. But we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more Lansing Update, where we're going to talk about how points may be affected on your record when we make some of these speed limit changes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Lansing Update. I'm your host, Katie Ciaramitaro, and of course we're here with State Representative Brad Jacobsen. Before the commercial break, we were talking about proposed changes to the speed limit, and one of the biggies, and probably what people are most interested in, is what major roads will be affected by the 80 miles per hour speed limit, so an increase to 80 miles per hour. Mm-hmm.
That's the one everybody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about the other four bills. It's been proposed a number of times to raise the speed limit beyond 70 on our interstates, on the limited access highways. Really, the bill doesn't specify any section of road. As we talked about in the previous segment about the 85th percentile data, really what we want to do is allow the state police to take and use that 85th percentile testing data across the state. And if they find areas that it would make sense to go to 80 miles an hour, allow that to happen. You know, if you think about it, it's probably going to be more rural areas. It wouldn't be on an M24. It would be probably on a I-75 or a 69, maybe between Flint and Lansing. There may be sections there. I drive that 3 to 4 times a week, 3 to 4 days a week, usually 6 to 8 round trips back and forth. There's areas through that are, depending on the day, the time, such, they're relatively little traffic. If you're going up through West Branch and up to northern Michigan to your cottage, I'm sure we've all been on section of roads where you look out the front window of your car and you look in the rearview mirror and you don't see a single car as far as you can see. Those are the type of areas I would anticipate possibly going to 80 miles an hour. There's provisions that would allow trucks to increase their speed on selected roads. It would allow for increase speed, not to 80, but increase on some of the rural U.S. highways. US 2 that goes across the Upper Peninsula. Most of it's 2 lanes wide, similar if you would to Baldwin Road, except it's much wider, wide shoulders, straighter sight lines, almost no cross traffic whatsoever other than occasional deer, raccoon, or moose maybe, or bear. Sections of road in the Upper Peninsula that are maybe 55 now, maybe those would go to 65 or maybe to 70, but I really wouldn't anticipate those going to 80. So it really allows them to adjust a whole variety of things. When you look at the speed studies right now across the state of Michigan, the 85th percentile data for interstates, I-75, I-69, 96, typical speed there is about 76 miles an hour right now. The fastest section of highway in Michigan is between Brighton and Novi on 96, which surprises me some in that it's a relatively heavily traveled section of road, but most of it's 3 to 4 lanes wide. It moves along very rapidly. The speed in that area is like 83 or 84 miles an hour. Now, a number of, I guess, comments I'd like to make about it. First off is most accidents, statistically, are caused by slow drivers rather than fast drivers. Wow. They're making a right-hand turn and they're only going, out, let's say on Clarkston Road. They're driving 35 miles an hour. They may or may not turn their blinker on like they're supposed to, their turn signal, but they make their turn very slowly to get off the road, or they slow way down much prior to their intersection. Those cause accidents. Traveling to Lansing yesterday, there was an elderly gentleman driving an old Oldsmobile, and he was under 70. I'm going to say he was probably going about 65 miles an hour. Wow. And I was following a tanker truck going probably a little over 70, and the tanker truck cut to the left lane to go around this gentleman, and all of a sudden I was looking at the back end of a guy going about 65 miles an hour, perhaps 62. It wasn't a hazardous situation for me. I mean, I was aware of it, moved over. It really wasn't close to being an accident. Now, if I had been distracted, if I'd been texting, doing something else, it could have very easily been an accident. Or if it had been a bigger vehicle, another semi following behind, it might not have been able to get over and adjust as quickly as I did. It could be an accident. So slow drivers tend to cause more accidents. They're not generally either as confident on the road, or they're distracted and they're slowing down because they're distracted. Drivers who drive at more rapid pace tend to be more alert, paying attention to what's going on, Perhaps more aggressive drivers also. But, and then there's the comment, well, if people drive, like right now, speed limit's 70, people drive 76. If it's set at 80, people are going to drive 85. Preliminary studies don't bear that out. Through the center of the city of Flint, I-69 a few years ago was 55 miles an hour. Created tremendous bottlenecks. Things slowed down to a crawl. It just wasn't an efficient move of traffic. So they moved it back to 70 miles an hour. Traffic picked up. Things moved more. Traffic flow was better. Really, the goal is largely to get people from A to B in a safe manner, but as quickly as possible. In some of the studies and interviews with drivers show that one of the reasons they drive fast is because they're trying to weave their way or work their way through slower, congested traffic that they feel is hindering them. So we've all seen somebody zipping along the right lane, cuts across 2 lanes, cuts back to the right. Well, if everybody's going 75, 70, 80 miles an hour, there's not a tendency, a need, if you would, to weave through to get past the people who are going 60 miles an hour in that case. So most of the studies tend to bear out that 80 miles an hour isn't we had one constituent contact our office and said, it's just a license to kill, you're trying to kill us all off. So that's certainly not the case, and the state police are the ones who will ultimately make the decision. The bills are still in the works, looking at some changes in them. Local government, villages, townships have some concerns that they would like to have some input on the state police to do this. State police ultimately has the final say, but we are trying to work with some of those groups so that the state police would accept input, or when they decided what they thought they wanted to do, notify the village, the township, or the local police official and say, we're looking at making these changes. You got 30 days to give us your input, something like that.
So let's quickly discuss how points may be affected on drivers' records if and when these speed limits are put into place.
Well, we are looking at a potential change in a very minor area of points for tickets. If you get most tickets from our study that are for 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. Now, if you get pulled over by an officer, you're going 10 miles and over, he's nice to you and writes you a ticket for 5 miles over instead. 5 mile over speed limits often are pled down in court to a obstructing traffic or a different level of violation. So you don't get the way it's done now, you don't get points if that's done. One of the reasons it's done is the local community usually gets more fine money for those type of violations than a speeding violation, and the money's divided up different, how it's allocated. And then you as a driver don't get points, so your auto insurance doesn't reflect a speeding violation, so you save money. So you pay a higher fine, the community's happy, and you don't get any points.
Wow.
So that's the way it tends to happen now. So since that tends to be the way it's going, we've got in one of our provisions that if you get a speeding violation for 5 miles over the speed limit, you would not get points, period. Now we've run into a little snag on that, particularly for commercial drivers, truck drivers, because Michigan belongs to what's referred to as an interstate compact. So Michigan and I think it's 14 other states compare information on driver incident records, particularly for commercial drivers. So we had to make some changes to that. So if you drive a semi from here to Ohio back and forth on a regular basis, and should this all pass and you get a 5-mile over ticket, you'll probably still get points, and it'll still be referred into this compact so other states can see what your driving record is. So
Very
you know,
interesting.
I've told many people this. You know, there's 2 sides to every story.
Yeah.
In Lansing, there's 14 sides to every story because when you think you've got something figured out, there's always a what if this happens or some other aspect to it. But it's fascinating stuff. I
Yes.
thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, we've covered quite a bit today. Those are 5 House bills that are in the works right now to change some speed limits to make things more efficient, safer in the local areas. So that's all the time we have for this episode of Lansing Update. I'm your host, Katie Ciaramitaro, and thank you so much, Brad Jacobsen, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And we will see you guys next time.